Well, it's March 1st, and I'm out here doing a little scouting this morning. And I'm coming up on one of my food plots here, and with it being now March, you start to think about spring plans, frost seeding, that type of stuff. And one of the common questions that I get in regards to food plots this time of year is whether or not a guy should frost seed a food plot. Typically like your clover, chicory seed varieties, or should wait and do more of a traditional spring planting. And I would say the answer to that is not a clear-cut one or the other. It really depends on the situation. So I'll try to cover a couple different variables here on how I would decide. First and foremost, as I come into this plot here, what does your existing seed bed look like, as it sits right now, prior to, when things thaw out in the spring? This is a perfect example. This is one that I'm going to frost seed into clover because I had a fall brassica plot planted here. So I already have a nice seed bed to go into. You can see kind of all the remnants of the turnips and stuff in here that are decomposing, but there's also a lot of soil exposed. So when I frost seed, that little clover seed's going to have good seed to soil contact. As we get those freeze thaw cycles throughout basically this entire month, that seed's going to get worked into a good germinating depth, and once the soil temps get up, it'll germinate. So that's number one. What does your seed bed look like? If it's not prepped, if there's a lot of grasses, there's not much soil exposed, you're better off waiting and taking the time to actually prep that seed bed in the spring prior to planting. Another big factor for me is what type of equipment do you have access to, and can you get all that equipment into a spot? Not saying you have to have a lot of equipment to plant a really good clover plot. This entire area here, I have clover on the north side, and then Nebraska's obviously on this end. I did all of this with very minimal equipment, basically a sprayer and a hand seeder. And so you can definitely do that, but this is an area that's hard for me to get equipment into. And so rather than taking the time to do a full prep of the seed bed and planting, I'm more apt to frost seed this, because the frost seeding obviously is minimal work. You're not doing anything except spreading the seed. You're letting Mother Nature handle most of the actual planting work by getting that seed into the soil. So I would consider that too. If it's an area where you have access to equipment, you can get in there, then yeah, go ahead and make the perfect seed bed, clear the vegetation, prep the soil, get fertilizer worked into the soil, all that type of stuff. But if not, if time's limited or equipment is limited, frost seeding is a really good method for most situations like that. If I'm doing my best to try to look at kind of an all things equal comparison, the best I can, apples to apples, the traditional spring planting is oftentimes going to yield the best results. Not always. Again, your frost seeding can do very well, can do just as good, but with a traditional spring planting, if you're taking the time to do everything and again have access to the equipment, you're eliminating more failure variables. So like frost seeding, you have the variables of, or the risk factors of, the seeds sitting there too long, potentially getting eaten up by birds, turkeys, etc. You have the variable of, if the seed doesn't get worked in the soil, you have the risk of it washing away. Maybe it's a big snow melt, maybe it's a big rain, but if that seed's just sitting there and not being incorporated in the soil yet, you have that risk. You also have the risk in some areas where maybe that soil temperature gets up there to where that seed starts to pop, starts to germinate, and then you get some really hard freezes. That young clover, especially right after germination like that, is just doesn't have the strength to withstand, you know, those late freezes. And so again, depending on where you're at regionally, you have that risk associated with frost seeding too. So again, the spring planting just eliminates more of those variables. You're waiting till you're past the freeze thaw cycle, you're taking the time to eliminate competing vegetation, and you're planting the seed and incorporate, or you know, packing it into the soil. You can also incorporate fertilizer a lot easier at that time too. Not to say you can't come back on a frost seeded plot and top dress with fertilizer, but you're not incorporating that. You're relying on rain to incorporate into the soil at that point. You're not doing it at the same time of planting. So again, just can be a little bit more effective waiting for a traditional planting, but it all just depends on your situation, your seed bed, your equipment, that type of stuff. So a few things to think about there. Reach out with questions. I'm always happy to help on this type of stuff. Like I said, this is one I'm gonna frost seed here coming up. For my area, I like to wait until about mid-March, just when we have, you know, a handful of freeze thaw cycles left. It doesn't take too many of them to get that seed into the soil. That clover seed, those small seeds don't need to be very deep. So that's my plan with this one, and I'm sure it'll turn out just great. I'm gonna put this back into brassicas, you know, later this summer, but I want that clover to kind of help fix the nitrogen in the soil, and also provide some off-season food for the deer. So best of luck this spring.